Foreign interference by China and other states has been an important topic of discussion in 2024. It's clear this has been happening for many years with little response from Canada. Listen to Dick Fadden's take on why this matters to our democracy and the need to take these threats seriously to protect our way of life.
I think you have to start from the premise that, particularly under President Xi, China has become much, much more assertive in trying to improve its position of leadership control in the world, and that they have effectively no limits on what they're prepared to do to advance their interest, to a considerable degree oriented towards the United States, but against the West generally. So their approach to this has been to sow chaos to the extent they can between countries and within countries. They have an almost unlimited budget and number of people in order to advance their interests in this fashion. So I think one of the most precious gifts that Canadians have is our democracy. If you have a foreign state trying to influence who is going to be elected to the House of Commons or a legislature, that is something to worry about, I think. And there's clear evidence that in some cases this happens. The challenge, of course, is that it's not very visible. It doesn't mean that if they don't like a particular candidate for the House of Commons, they're going to kidnap the person or do something like that. But by spending money on the other candidate, by spreading mis and disinformation about somebody who's either a candidate or a candidate within a political party, or by threatening people, to cause them to develop positions in the ethnic media, or by spending a lot of money in the ethnic press positively for a particular candidate. But my point is, democracy in this country is, I think, one of our most cherished attributes. And if any country, and it ain't just China, we need to remind ourselves, I think it's been made clear before Justice Hogg's inquiry recently, at least 4 or 5 countries are trying to influence how we run this country. And I don't think that's a good thing. And as I mentioned earlier, intimidation attempts on the part of some of these countries against some of our citizens, surely to God, you don't have to see your next door neighbor being, hauled away in the trunk of a car to realize how dangerous, how terrible it is. If you're from country X, where the secret police, is the most important component of your government, and you're told that if you don't do X, Y, Z, or if you don't not do X, Y, Z, your parents back in the host country are going to be subject to intimidation. That is very, very frightening. And yes, it might not affect you directly or me directly, but it affects our fellow citizens, and I think we need to do something about it. But it's also, I've talked about foreign interference relating to our democratic institutions, but it's not just elections, it's democratic institutions generally. It's not just the federal level. It's people trying to muck about with some of our industries, traditional espionage, which again is a form of foreign interference. But I think you have to start from the premise that we're not living in, I can't think of a better way, we're not living in paradise. There are countries who fundamentally do not like the way the world is organized. We have contributed to its current form of organization, and they want to change it. And they're going to use whatever means they can, short of war, to make those changes. And eventually it will have an impact. And your point, I think, is a correct one. Part of the issue is it's not tomorrow. It's not something that's really obvious on a day-to-day basis. It's looking at China broadly and Russia broadly and these other countries broadly and realizing they're not out there to be our friends. They are not our friends. I think we're moving a bit towards the sphere of influence kind of environment that we were in years ago. But just to illustrate China again, and I'm going beyond your question, I was recently in Taiwan with a bunch of people that I know. We were there at the invitation of the government of Taiwan because we've been trying to, talk to them about how the government of Canada should treat Taiwan. 40% plus of the world's container traffic goes through the Straits of Taiwan. It goes through the Straits of Taiwan right now because it is considered to be an international waterway. China considers it to be its internal waters. If we in the West, and if Taiwan does not succeed in heading off China's desire to control that waterway, that 40% plus of container traffic is going to be subject to Chinese control. I don't think that's in the interest of the private sector, civil society, of any of our governments. So that's a more immediate thing, but I probably think there are no more than 1,000 people in Canada who realize that 40% plus of container traffic in the world goes through the Taiwan Straits. You know, I believe that governments have a leadership explanation role in some of these areas, and I don't think that successive governments have been very inclined to do that. So I think we need more of that from our governments. I don't mean fear-mongering, because I don't think the world's going to be blown up tomorrow. But if Canadians don't hear from their government about some of these threats, the real worry is mis and disinformation, which is rampant. You don't have to go into the dark web, to find really outrageous suggestions about how the West is organized, how our government is organized, what our allies are doing. So you put all this together in a stew, and it comes out to be pretty toxic. Canadians don't like talking about it. It's not a short-term issue. So that's the best I can do.